G'day guys, it's Supercoach with DR here, wrapped to be on Big J's channel. Welcome to the Centre Bounce. All good?
All good.
Beautiful.
Hey DR, thanks for coming on the channel today.
Thank you very much for having me, mate. Look, we've been chatting for a little while in the comments on Facebook and on Twitter and all the rest, but really good to finally sit down with you and have a proper chat, Big J, because there's not long to go until the start of the season. So a little bit nervous, very excited. Don't know how I feel at the moment, but yeah, thanks very much for having me on, mate. Absolutely wrapped to be here.
Yeah, I'm really glad after all that, bit of an endeavor trying to get you on the channel. And it's just like, yeah, I'm glad to see you here today. Speaking about making your team, I only did that today. So I did that probably half an hour before recording this. So you have your ideas, but it's basically making all the parts fit, which is the hard part. So yeah.
It's tough, mate. But I'm glad you finally got it done.
Yeah,
I'll be very
me too.
keen to see how it's looking.
Yeah, me too. So just for those who haven't seen your channel before, haven't seen your content, do you mind just explaining who you are, I guess how long you've been doing Supercoach and what team do you go for? Obviously, you've got the Lions in the background there.
Yeah, well, I'm an old Fitzroy boy. I do say old Fitzroy boy before I say Brisbane Lions fan, but very passionate Lions fan, obviously. I'm pretty sure that I've been playing the game since the first year that it's been open. So I was heavily involved in, the Supercoach Talk community. I got to know a lot of people there and very, very quickly became absolutely addicted to Supercoach. I've met some really great people from it. And yeah, maybe too passionate, my wife says at times, maybe too passionate. But yeah, absolutely love the game. And I've had the channel for about 2 years now. So that's been really fun. Again, met a heap of great people like yourself. I'm on your channel today. And apart from that, collect vintage action figures. I'm a primary school teacher. I live in Melbourne. And that's pretty much me, Big J. Yeah.
Do you find yourself yelling at the TV? Be like, Lockie Neal, why you not get the tackle,
All the time. And I think that's another great thing about Supercoach. You get invested in basically every game, don't you? Because I don't think there's too many games that you watch where you don't have at least one player. So I think that's another great thing about playing Supercoach. You're just invested all the time, regardless of whether or not it's actually your team or not.
I think definitely is like, I was holding off on getting anyone from West Coast or even Gold Coast this year. And it's like, now I can watch those games too. So
exactly right.
Yeah. That's something I've really found is that I think as a general fan, you only watch your game, whereas, I'd watch North Melbourne because I'm a North fan, whereas with Supercoach, you watch everyone. So more football's always good.
100%, mate, 100%.
Yeah. How excited are you for having football back this year? It comes back on Wednesday.
It's a little bit early, isn't it? I don't know how you feel about it, but geez, 1 or 2 more days would be fantastic, wouldn't it? Just to do a bit of extra planning. I think, but look, I love the footy. Obviously, Brisbane don't play too many games down here in Victoria, so I get to every Brisbane match that's down here, whether or not it's Marvel, MCG. I went down to Mars Stadium to watch them play the Doggies last year, went down to Geelong as well. We had a heartbreaking loss. I reckon we're a little bit robbed there, but I'm not going to relive that experience again, Big J. But yeah, absolutely love my footy, mate, and really excited to see the footy back.
That Wednesday start time has really creeped up on me. And it's like, tomorrow teams are coming out. I'm like, what?
Crazy.
What? It's a Wednesday. Leave me alone. I need more time. To think about like 2 or 3 years ago, we barely had a Thursday starting game. And now there's more and more of those throughout the seasons too. So for Supercoach especially, you've really got to keep on top of your game, don't you? It's not just Friday, Saturday, Sunday like it used to be. It's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday this week. Or if it's like Anzac Day, it's like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday,
There's no time off. There's no time off, is there?
Not during the season.
It's a full-time job, Supercoach, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. Especially making content and just like watching the games. And we're a bit invested, obviously, in the community and in the sport. But for your regular person doing Supercoach, instead of just Sunday night being the time you look at your team, now they've got to do Mondays too. So it's
Exactly right. Big commitment, mate. Big commitment to do it right, to do it properly anyway, I think.
Got to win that 50K, right?
Exactly. That would be handy for me at the moment, let me tell you.
Yeah, me too. So in today's episode, I've got you on. We're just going to do something a bit different today. So talking about, it's not going to be, hey, how's your team going episode, or what do you think of the preseason, that kind of thing. I'm going to try and get your thoughts and your thought process of at particular points in the season, what do you normally kind of think about, and what's your thought process, and how do you think with manipulating your team going throughout the year?
Sounds great. Really good concept. I tell you what, though, I'm a little bit frazzled at the moment. So we'll see how we go leading into round one. But yeah, I'll obviously do my best to give some thoughts, Jay, for sure, mate. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a hand there. So no worries, mate. We'll work it out. So first off, we've got the preseason. For me personally, the preseason is probably the biggest part of the year. It can make or break your season and kind of set you up for how well you're going to do throughout the year. What do you reckon?
100%. 100%. I think those people that do the extra research, put in the hard yards during the preseason, are going to be much better off even during the season, because you've already done your research. You know the blokes that you want to lock in. You know the blokes that you like. You're looking at already who to put on your watch list early, so you're not waiting until the practice matches come around and get your notepad out. Oh, geez, who should I actually be focusing on here? You're all set. You know what you're doing, you're focused. So I think the earlier, the better. I know there are some people that even say, I don't even look at my team or do anything until sort of mid-January. But I think the earlier you get in, the better. That's just me personally. Maybe I love the game too much. Maybe I do need to ease off a little bit and stress less. But I think the more research you do, the more people you chat with early on the preseason, get some of those whispers, get some of those that news. It's only good, I think, for me.
Were you jump on, I think it was like December 20. Were you a jump on December 20 at midnight, pay your $20 and then start super coaching kind of person?
I was. It was like Christmas coming. I'll tell
definitely.
you what, it was just amazing, mate. It's probably one of my favorite days of the year, I think, when it opens, because to be honest, I already had my team pretty much mapped up in my head. There's some blokes on Twitter that put those early price projections for, so you can start to make a little bit of a plan yourself. So sort of heading into the team picker, the day that it opened, I pretty much went bang, bang, bang. Here we go. Let's get this team rolling. So
oh, that's pretty keen, man. I know I definitely had it. I had it paid for, but maybe not exactly. I've got my team worked out and that kind of thing. It's interesting. There's a big argument for, you're obviously on one side of the fence. I had Supercoach Mama on the team on the channel a couple of days ago, and she was the other side, talking about how maybe it's because she won last year, but distancing yourself a little bit in the preseason until maybe like February, when a bit of the hype about players goes away, you start to get the preseason games, that kind of thing. So you're not blurred with like vision of some guy you really liked in December, wanting to fit him in, and he hasn't had any preseason games, he's not fit, wanting to put him in your team, but, instead of going off the evidence of what we'll get during the regular season.
Mate, I'll tell you what, if that's what Supercoach Mama says, I'm listening very, very carefully. You know what I mean? I'm not betting against Supercoach Mama this year or any year. So, but as you said, there's always two sides to the argument.
Yeah, definitely.
Two people that have been playing for a long time, very, very opposite ideas. And that's what's great about the game, I think. But unfortunately, I think we'll get into probably a bit of this discussion. A lot of the teams are looking pretty similar at the moment, aren't they? But yeah, we'll talk about that probably a little bit later.
Yeah. So just talking about how you make your team, how much time do you normally put in the preseason preparation with picking your players versus what you would do in the regular season with picking a player?
I think I'm just so passionate about it that I think about Supercoach every day.
Okay.
Every day. And that's preseason, and that's during the season as well. So, look, I do a ton of work during the preseason, an absolute ton of work. But then during the season, you need to be across absolutely everyone as well. And I think obviously doing the stock market videos, I'm across everyone's break evens every week, which I think is really, really important when you're looking to make your decisions. What's their break even like? What's their price going to be, not just this week, but in 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks? Try to project that as well. But yeah, heap of work obviously during the season. Obviously try to watch every match that I can. I speak to people that support particular clubs, try to get any inside info that I can get. And just get on all the websites, Twitter, speak with blokes like yourself and other people in the community. A heap of work during, and obviously a heap of work before.
Let's say if you miss, you're busy on a Sunday, you miss out, let's say Gold Coast and Geelong game. During the week, will you actually put KO on and watch that game, or are you kind of just, I'll look at the stats kind of person?
No, I will. I'll
You
actually
will?
watch the game myself because I think that the stats only tell one side of the story sometimes.
Mhm.
And I don't think that anything really beats the old eye test. It is tough on TV sometimes
Yeah,
because
definitely.
you can't see running patterns. You can't see what people are doing off the screen and without the ball.
Mm.
Being at the match live is absolutely fantastic if you can get a nice view of the game. But yeah, look, I obviously take the stats into account 100%.
Mhm.
Because sometimes you are watching the game and you do miss things
Yeah,
and you don't
definitely.
see everything during the game. Particularly, I also get tunnel vision on particular players at
Mm.
times as well, and often miss out what some other players do because I've just got the blokes that I'm focusing on. But yeah, that's for me, mate. I definitely take a bit of both into account. Yeah, don't rely on one or the other.
Yeah. I think for me, watching the game, I kind of get immersed a lot in that and the crowds and all that kind of stuff. So, like you're saying, the ball's down this end and you'll want to watch this player down this end, but you're focused on where the ball's going.
Yeah,
So,
that's
yeah,
right.
going back and rewatching the game or even like just looking at stats and stuff outside of actually watching it, it's really important kind of getting both of those things happening.
Exactly right, mate. Yeah.
How hard have you, sorry, thinking about you're in the preseason, how hard has it been for you to actually make a team this year compared to other years that you've played Supercoach?
I can't remember you like it. To be
Mm.
honest, I probably said this last year, though, mind you, and I probably said that the year before. I'll probably keep on saying it every year that I play. But this year, it's just different. I
Mm.
think it really is different. You got some of those what seem almost must-have Uber premiums. You've obviously
Yep.
got the big four, I probably suppose you'd say. And then we've got this situation where there's not a heap of good rookies,
No.
unfortunately. And the good rookies we're actually paying up for. We need to pay
Mm-hmm.
decent coin for. So I know I did the maths the other day when I was actually creating my side. And from the original side that I created with the rookies in my team,
Mm-hmm.
I've lost 320K in value
Wow,
by having to
that's a
move with
lot.
some of these more expensive players. And I'm talking about,
Yeah.
Ward wasn't really on my radar. I was more of a Connor McDonald fan. I thought he was
Mm-hmm.
probably ahead of Ward. There's lots of players that Rochelle was another one who I wasn't expecting to pay up for.
Mm.
I'm not a fan of Gibcus, but do we have to pay up for someone like a Gibcus just to have someone there that's playing? It's all these sort of blokes and people like Holland's not getting a game. Sam Skinner, even who's at
Mm.
a pretty attractive price. Lots of stuff's been thrown out of the window, I think, this year, or from what I was thinking the preseason anyway. A lot's changed up until now when we're almost at the start of round one. So, yeah, to answer that question, mate, it has been extremely difficult. And that's why I've only put out my team, was it last night? I think
Yeah,
because I've
I think
been
last night, yeah.
struggling to actually put it together. I've been going from this team to that team, this structure, change the structure. But at the end of the day, you've just got to come up with something, don't you?
Mm.
Be half happy with it. I've got to that stage at the moment, but we'll just wait to see who's named come the team sheets. But yeah, really tough so far. How about yourself, mate? You been cruising or you been struggling like I have?
Mate, I made my team like half an hour ago. So
I think
yeah.
that answers the question probably,
Yeah.
doesn't it?
I think it's weird. This year's probably one of the few years where people used to talk about, oh, a team's got a gem in like the 3rd to 5th round. They've got this guy, he's fallen down the ladder, he's ready to play, blah, blah, blah. I think in Supercoach, outside of guys who've been in the system a couple of years, every player that we're picking for our teams has almost been a first rounder.
It's so true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so true. When you look at the names on our bench and even on our field with the rookies, filled with those sort of blokes, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, we're not getting like the 3rd round guy at 115K that's going to bust his guts and score us a lot this year. They're all people who haven't played AFL because of COVID, and they're just not selectable for our side. So I agree with you. The teams that we made back in December, they're not even close to the teams that we're doing now. And we would have scoffed at having so many 150K plus players in December before the rookies got announced, compared to what we're actually forced to pick now. It's like, what? You've got guys on your bench that cost 150K? Like,
crazy. Yeah.
that doesn't work. You're playing 3 midfielders? Like, what is this madness?
It is nuts. And even players like Dean we've lost. Greg Clark, who was a lock for me. We've lost Hollands, I think. Last time I looked, he was still in about 35% of sides. Don't know what it's like now. People are actually getting their act together.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, these are the troubles that we've had, I think. And that's what's making it difficult now is that we have to pay up for some of these rookies, unfortunately. But
Mm.
that's life. That's part of the game. That's part of Supercoach, and what makes it interesting, yet challenging at the same time.
Oh, definitely. I think it's going to be a year of what you do throughout the season versus what your team actually looks like, because teams are so close. I know we're talking off air about like most people's forward lines basically look the same. Maybe
Yeah,
two or
so
three
true.
players are different, but that's it. So how you play throughout the year, which is, some of the questions that we're going to answer today, is really going to dictate how you do versus you've got an advantage over me because you made a better starting team.
True. Couldn't agree more, mate.
So bit of a question. How much risk is too much risk when we're doing your starting team? And how do you kind of analyze that?
It's a tough question. And this is the issue with answering a question like that. When we're talking about risk, I think it's in the eye of the beholder. So what I view as a risky team, you may not view as a risky team, and vice versa, for example. So is it more of a risk this year trying to fit in 12 to 13? Is anyone fitting in 14 premiums? I'm not too sure. But I think, usually it's maybe less of a risk going the guns and rookies approach. I think traditionally that's probably been the most successful strategy that we've seen work out in the past. But this year, I think that may be even more of a risk going the guns and rookies, because there's not too many cheap options that I've got a lot of great confidence in. So then we think to ourselves, is it less risky going more of that mid-price approach? Well, maybe yes. Other people may say no. And then we go really risky. And this is possibly where I'm maybe going a little bit wrong with my side at the moment. I'm going pretty mid-price on all lines. I'm talking about your Rows, your Berries, the forwards full of mid-price, something like a Chapman in my defensive line. People may view that as being really risky, and having so many high-price rookies on the field, on the bench. If I've got a Gipkiss, let's say a Ward and a Rochelle on the bench, well, hey, is that risky by having so much money tied up on my bench? Or is that not risky because I've got players with good job security that are able to come on field? So it depends how you want to look at risk. But I think that this probably is a year where we may be able to afford a little bit more risk, given the fact we've got 35 trades. But again, I think the reason for having 35 trades is to deal with any potential COVID issues. But I was speaking with a few of the blokes that know what they're talking about in the preseason, and they didn't rule out actually giving us even more trades potentially if we really need it, if there's a lot of COVID carnage. So we can't rule that out. That is a possibility. Pete Jank was, actually mentioned that to me on Twitter. So that's something to keep into account as well. I think we can take a little bit of risk this year. I think we probably need to, and we're almost forced into taking risk with some of these value picks.
Yeah, I look at some of the players that I've picked, and it's just like any other year you'd never pick them, but this year you have to. It's like, oh, you're 200K and you're playing, cool, you're in my side. So yeah, pretty much, right?
Exactly right.
How do you weigh up picking a player who's not a highly owned player this year?
This is another discussion that we were quickly having on air. Now, when I look at player ownership, I don't tend to look at what's on the Supercoach app. So, you go and look at what Dusty's ownership is, 35%, whatever it is. I'm just making out that number. I wouldn't have a clue what it is. But that's the whole Supercoach population, mind you. So what I really try to focus on is following people that I rate, that I think have been successful at the game, who I know are good coaches. And I really tend to keep a really keen eye on who they're selecting and base my ownership percentage off, let's just say, the top 3,000 coaches, or as many of those type of people that I can follow, or people that are making content that I seem to know what they're talking about. So if I find that a lot of the elite coaches are fading a particular player, then generally that'll get my ears pricked up. And I'll think to myself, well, there's probably going to be some sort of an issue with this selection. I really need to rethink it. And on the flip side, if there's a selection that maybe the general Supercoach community isn't a really big fan of, but you see those top 3,000 coaches and maybe 40 to 50% of those people have a particular player where maybe it's 20, 15% with the general population, and I'll gravitate towards those sort of players as well. But I think we never pick a pod just for the sake of having a pod. You go with the player that you think is going to be the most successful pick. And if lots of people have him, then I've got no problem with going with him. Because again, if you go against that pick and just go for a pod for the sake of it, then you're betting against most likely a player with a fair bit of potential here that a lot of other coaches have. So it can be actually dangerous going with the pod. But if a good pod works, then yeah, it can absolutely make your season and give you a really good head start. But I don't mind going a little bit vanilla and then backing my trading strategy throughout the season, I think, to give myself an edge on the other teams.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. I think a point I would say as well is that we do as much research as we can, but if a player's got 50 to 60% ownership and you don't have him, I think sometimes you have to think about, why don't I have him as well? Because what do, let's say, 50% of the population know that you don't know? You know what I mean? So what do 95% of the top 1,000, why are they picking this player and you're not? You can't do research on everybody, but that definitely is really important to kind of factoring. Okay, well, everyone's picking him, so maybe it's a good idea to pick him.
That's right. It can be even more dangerous, even if you're not really sold on the selection and they're a highly owned player. It can be more dangerous actually betting against them, because if they go right, then a lot of people have got that pick right.
I think I've seen people talk about that way with Lockie Whitfield. It's like, I don't like Lockie Whitfield, but when 60% or 70% ownership have him, can you really afford to have someone else that scores worse in a week, because you're just missing out on those monster scores?
True. Yeah.
Have you had any gut feelings about players, but you're too scared to pick them this year?
Well, good question. Any gut feels about players? I'll tell you what, there's a few Sydney boys maybe that I've got a little bit of a gut feel about, and that's McInerney.
Yep.
I think he's been playing really well off halfback. I think he's got the attributes and the traits and the skills to play that role really, really well. And the other bloke's the lizard, Nick Blakey.
Yeah.
I'd love to own him. He's just one of those players where when he gets the ball, it just seems to be entertaining. It's his running style, tucks on the arm, off he goes. I really, really like him as a player as well. But their price points, my confidence in those players, I'm not absolutely sold. But again, I think they've really got the ability to play their roles well. And Blake in particular was an early selection, really talented type player. I was thinking originally more key position type, but it doesn't seem like they're going to go down that road with Blakey. They're trying to get him more into that running role.
Doing a bit of that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So there are a couple of blokes that I really would love to select. The other bloke, and this sounds a bit of a funny one, is the Seagull. I'm favoring the Seagull this year. Gut says that he's a safe pick, but Gut says to me that someone like a Jaden Short has the potential to average as much as Lloyd. So I'm not going to start him at, 40, 50K more, when I rate someone like a Short with the same scoring potential. So yeah, that's a bit of a gut feel not to start him. But yeah, I would love to start one of the two Sydney boys, mate, just to give you an example. But yeah, probably plenty of others out there apart from those guys. Well, Zach Bailey, the Rat Bailey, he's one of my favourite players. Just love this bloke. He could be anything, but is it going to be this year? Is he too good of a forward? How much time does he spend in the midfield? Too many question marks, I think, for me at this stage. But I would love to have him on my side as well. Yeah,
I think for me, a lot of it comes down to we're only given a certain amount of spots that we can actually choose. And I think this year seems to have a lot of locked in players and a lot of locked in positions. So looking at, I wanted to play McInerney, like you're saying, down back, but do I pick him over a George Hewitt, at a similar price? Which one's a better pick to start with? Because we don't have the options to pick both. Do I pick the Hewitt that's set, that 80% of the population has him, that has a midfield role, or do I go with this guy that I kind of like, that, I think he's going to do well, but it's really risky and it could work or it couldn't work,
Summed it up perfectly with the McInerney pick, for example. Summed it up perfectly. Yeah.
Well, I've got a better one. You think about, I really wanted to run Heaney this year, but there's no way that I'm going to start him over a Zach Butters. There's just no way that that's going to happen. So kind of weighing up. Or similar to a Parrish in the midfield. I wanted him, but am I going to pick him over Tuke Miller? I've got one spot left up. It doesn't work, right?
Yep.
Yeah. It's really tough.
Oh, it is. And I was with you on the Heaney train. I
Mm,
was all aboard the Heaney train. You know, I dream of Heaney.
yeah.
But after watching the practice match, just became an absolute nightmare. The dream turned to a nightmare. And I just thought to myself, do you know what? I'm not putting myself through the pain. We've been guaranteed this before.
Mhm.
Oh, Papley's out. I know Buddy's coming back, but I just thought, nah, I'm not going to start with him. And I'm prepared to upgrade to him and pay a little bit more coin if I have to, just to see
Yeah.
him in the role. But if I don't see him in the role, I said to myself, I don't see him in the role, I'm not going to run with him. Didn't see him.
Mm,
I stuck to that, and I'm not going to run with him at this
yeah.
stage.
And I think with forward lines, especially, they'll be cheap enough throughout the season that you can upgrade someone to pick him up.
That's
so
right.
it's not like you're missing out on a midfielder that will end up being 650k.
Yeah,
so,
it's a big difference,
yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
So I've got one here. When you're making your starting team, do you normally consider the buys, or are you kind of, I pick who I want and then I mold my team around not having so many donuts, if at all, in the buy rounds?
Yeah, look, originally I don't even think about the buys when I'm actually selecting my side. And then once I've selected it, then I tend to go back and see how we're looking.
Okay.
Now, with a year like this year, who knows what's going to happen with COVID? With the last couple of years, I haven't taken the buys into account as much as I usually would.
Okay.
Because of the uncertainty, I
Yeah.
suppose. But you do always have to take them into account, because if you're down to, and I've seen teams last year even at 12 to 13 players somehow during a bye, if you're going for overall, it kills you in 1 week. It can absolutely kill you. So I think that you certainly take them into account, but they're not the be all and end all. You know, you do focus on them, but don't let that create your team structure. Don't just rely on that. You know, maybe when you're 50-50 about a particular player, then really look at their buy structure, and maybe you select the bloke that fits your buy structure the best if you're really 50-50 on a selection. But one thing I would really recommend on doing is not leaving it to the last minute. You know, if you're waiting 2 weeks out until the buys and you're going, all right, let's have a look at how my structure's looking now, it could be too late. We do have the trade boosts, though. That may help some people. And I think that's probably another reason why we may be able to be a little bit more lenient with the way that we structure our team come the buys, because we do have some trade boosts. And that's a whole discussion in itself, how people are actually going to use those boosts. There's a number of different strategies. I've thought about 10 different strategies in my head, how I can use them already. So that's probably another layer to the complexity, having those trade boosts, but that may make it a little bit easier for us. I think maybe not to worry too much about it this year.
Yeah. I think for me personally, I don't worry about it too much. I'll make my team and have a look at it once I've kind of set my players in. But I think typically up until the bye rounds, I won't pick like 4 Dogs players in my team. You know, I won't pick 3 Melbourne players in my team, that kind of thing, to try and help mitigate that a little bit. Sometimes we've had years when Max Gawn and Grundy has been, you know, same buy and we get a bit, you know, smashed that way. But I think mitigating that a little bit with just picking players who aren't in the same team. And, you know, you've got sides that, like a Brisbane this year, there's potentially 3 or 4 players that you want to pick. So weigh up a little bit of that, be like, okay, I'll grab you later because it's going to hurt me to start with. So I think that's probably about it for me. Is I agree with you. We're probably going to use a few trade boosts and stuff, and that's one of the questions when we get to the bye rounds. But don't be like, okay, I've made my team. I have 18, 18, 18. I'm set. Because, you know, we've got 12 weeks of not knowing what rookies pop up to, right?
Injuries as well.
Injuries as well.
Yeah,
so
it's very rare if you get to the buys and not one of your premiums has been injured. It's you've had a lucky year up to that stage, if that's the case. So that's another reason maybe why you think to yourself, I can be a little bit more lenient this year.
So just finishing off the preseason, do you like to run a full playing team of rookies, or do you try and put in a loophole player? This year's a little bit different because we haven't had the rookies, but what do you normally like to do?
Normally I run with loophole every year.
Okay.
Every year. Now, I may be inflating this a little bit, but I'm pretty sure, and shout out to Supercoach Data on Twitter, who puts out some great numbers there. He put out some numbers of success with vice captain and captaincy picks. So basically, which coaches earned the most points through their captain or vice captain. And I'm pretty sure that I was in the top 30 last year, and I used my vice captain 42% of the time.
Okay.
So for me, that's almost or getting close to a 50-50 split where I do actually use a loophole. Now, the issue with selecting a loophole at the start of the year is usually we go for a player that we don't think is going to play, hopefully 102K player with some DPP. But the issue is that the loophole normally works itself out by rounds, usually even 2, 3, 4. We're going to have players that are missing for one reason or another. It's a rookie that gets dropped, someone's injured for a week, maybe a concussion protocol, something like that, where you will have a particular player that can fill in. So what I'm doing with my loophole this year, trying to get the best of both worlds, is I'm selecting a player as my loophole who I don't think is going to be playing for the first few rounds, but does have the opportunity to come into the side, hopefully sooner rather than later. Maybe around 5 or 6, let's just say, for example. And for me, I'm currently going with Ned Long. He kicked 4 behinds in the latest practice match. So, if they're 4 goals, it's going to be pretty hard not to play this bloke, isn't it? If those 4 goals go through. So he's a player for me who I don't think is going to be playing round 1, but I do think that he will come into the side, hopefully at some stage, and he will end up being an actual player that generates some cash gen for me. So that's how I'm going with my loop this year. And I think having Jack Mcrae with all these early games on a Friday night, that's really tempting. On the other hand, though, if you're selecting someone like a Tuke Miller, you should be able to lock into 120 plus. I think most weeks with this great man, particularly round 1 when he comes up against the Eagles. I don't know what's going to happen with this score. It could be amazing. It could be an absolute monster.
250 points done.
Yeah, like I'm talking Gary Ablett and his prime type numbers. It could be, but that's how I feel personally. Loophole, mate. How about yourself? You running with one this year, Big J?
This year, so normally I do, and it's either, I think last year I might have had. I think not Davies, but one of those guys in the midfield, like a cheap 102 Gold Coast guy. Yeah. This year, I don't think I will, which is really controversial for me. But I think cash gen is going to be so nasty not to have this year that I agree with you. Picking someone who might come in later on is a really good idea. But, I've got 102K forward rucks as my R3, so they might get dropped anyway, right? So it's not.
That's true.
Yeah. It's not too bad, but I've had times when, because we've had outs and I've picked a loophole, I've got no playing rookies on the bench.
It makes it tough, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It makes it
and
tough.
Mcrae gets a head knock and misses a week, and then I've got a donut in the midfield. So it's really tough. That's my going anyway. What's your threshold for VC?
Oh, well, if I want to be really specific, mate, about 123.5.
Okay, that's very
about
specific.
that. Like, I love to see 125, but even if it's at 120, I'm generally a safe type of player. I don't get too greedy. Sometimes I think best case scenario, and you look at the player's average maybe. So if my vice captain's got 120 and my captain is on a Jack Steele and he's averaging 130 on the season, I'm thinking, am I going to risk it for an extra 10 points? I'm probably going to stay safe. But other people, I know Spills is terrible. Or when I say terrible, sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't. He's a bit more greedy than me. So there's been at times where he's knocked back a 125, let's just say, and then the captain's punched out a 70 to an 80. So that's a risk that you run for 10 points potentially. And when I say 10 points, it could be 50 points extra. I'm not sure about that, but I'm probably more of a safer player, mate, just above the 120 mark for me.
It does hurt, though, when you get a 120 and Max Gawn gets a 170 in a game.
It's a killer, isn't it?
And then
sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
All the time. And I've been the other end too, is that like they've struggled, especially the Ruckman last year. They had a few games when they struggled to make 100 points.
They did.
And it's just like, I've not took a 120. I've taken this. And it's just, man, painful. Sucks so much. So moving on from the preseason, we finished the preseason now. We're into rounds 1 to 5. So thinking about your team, how you're going to be managing your team is probably the right words in rounds 1 to 5, because that's where we're up to right now, which is in like 2 days, really. So
scary.
Yeah. So what's your views on making trades in the first few rounds? And do you expect to make any trades in the first rounds 1 to 2? for right
Absolutely
now.
not. No, absolutely not. That's a big rule of mine.
Mhm.
Is I never make it look unless they're long-term injury. So if
Yeah.
long-term injury, you have to. It'd be silly not to trade someone that's going to be out for 5, 6 weeks, whatever. But absolutely not in the first 2 weeks. Look, if you have an underperforming premium, that's okay. These guys can bounce back. You know, Tuke Miller last year, I think he started off with an 80, then I think it was a 130, and then another sub 100 score in the first few weeks. So if you lose faith early on him, you trade him out. Imagine how you're feeling at the end of the season if you
Yeah,
made a move
definitely.
like that. But when it does come to the round before the price rises,
Mhm.
I always trade. So,
Okay.
when I say always, I rarely have the perfect side
Yeah.
going
So
into.
that's round 2, basically.
That's right. At
Yeah.
the end of round two, I think you've really, really got to think carefully about using your two trades,
Mhm.
potentially even a trade boost if something doesn't look right. Now,
Yeah.
usually I stick fat with my premiums, but I'll
Mhm.
give you an example. Last year, I started with Lockie Neal, and being a Brisbane supporter, obviously, I watched him really, really carefully,
Yeah.
and I could just tell something's not right here. You know, I need to get out of this pick. This is the
Mhm.
right time to get out of this pick. Usually I'd keep faith, but if there's that many red flags and alarm bells, particularly with a player that you think you're pretty much all over,
Mhm.
then yeah, it is a good chance to get rid of him. So I end up using DPP, getting out Neil and bringing in Jordan Ridley. So short term, that was a really, really good move until Ridley goes and gets
Yeah,
concussed and,
definitely, right?
you know, his
And then
season
loses
goes
his role
downhill.
later on too.
I was spewing, mate. I was absolutely spewing. But yeah, I think it's really important to do your best to make sure that you've got all the must-have rookies before
Mhm.
the first price changes. And that way you've sort of set your team up. And
Yeah.
if you have missed out in a couple, other teams have them, you're sort of at least back on track with them. You may have lost out with some on-field scores for the first couple of weeks, but that's okay. At least you've got them in the side now. Cash gen, as you mentioned before, and that's why we're not going with the loophole, which I think,
Yeah.
yeah, is again a great strategy as well. Either way you want to go about it. But as you mentioned, cash gen is king. Yeah, if you need to get one of these rookies in. So last year it could have been if you didn't have a Zeeble,
Mhm.
a Warner early, maybe an Impey, one of these guys. If you missed out on one of these guys for the season, yeah, you're a little bit behind the pack. But if you had jumped on them early, then it wouldn't have been as harsh, I don't think.
Yeah. Especially those guys that are going to be jumping like 80K. And then
Yeah, yeah,
that's the price point you must get them in. Otherwise, you're spending 2 trades for a trade that you could have done one
that's
for to
right.
get the same player, right?
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. I think last year as well was a bit of carnage early. Dunkley didn't get injured till like round 6, but Danger was out. What, round 1? And end of
Yep.
round 1, I think he got suspended or got injured. I think Matt Rao was a similar as well,
He
right?
was. He was.
Played early and then that was it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
how do you feel about, let's say, a premium who has a real stinker? So hypothetically, Tuke Miller, it's not going to happen with Tuke Miller, right? Hypothetically, let's say Max Gorn gets knocked out early. So let's say round 1, he gets knocked out, he scores like a 5. Would you consider trading him to like a Darcy at a similar price to avoid the price drop? Or they're kind of just like, okay, I'm going to have him. Well, let's not say Max Gorn. Let's say Jack Mcrae, because it's set and forget rucks, right? So Jack Mcrae,
Yep.
you're going to get him in at some point straight away at the start of the season. He's really expensive, gets knocked out round 1, is going to tank in price and end up being really cheap for the people who didn't start him. Would you consider getting rid of him before round 3 to avoid that happening and you getting another premium you didn't start? Or I've got Jack Mcrae, I'm going to have him, just save the trade.
Look, I probably would keep him.
Okay.
I think being someone like a Jack Mcrae, I think they'd keep him because you've got to remember that other people are going to jump on him when he's cheap anyway. I think you've just got to take the hit. You really do got to take the hit. And like, who's to say that, you know, he's still going to be cheap when you want to bring him back into your side?
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
after he comes back for his couple of weeks, I'm
Mm.
sure that, you know, if it's an elite player, and I know Jack Mcrae is only one example, but if we're talking about a half decent player,
Yeah.
they're going to start to rise pretty much straight away again after that score is out of their system. So unless you've got the money and you're prepared to trade him back in within the next sort of 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, then you might even be paying as much for him than what
That's
you
what
did
he
when you
was.
traded him out.
Yeah.
So for me, I probably wouldn't under that particular circumstance. For me, that's me personally anyway. Other people may think about that a little bit differently and say, "No, look, I'm just going to get out of the pick now, and hopefully I'll be able to get him cheaper. But yeah, you can't always back on these players getting cheaper. And someone like Jack Mcrae, for example, last year, he only went down 50K below his original price point.
Pretty crazy, right?
Yeah, good luck betting on getting him cheap. But yeah, in that example, I'd tend to keep him, mate. Yeah.
I guess that's a little bit different than what you were saying just before about Lachie Neale, how he really didn't look like he was right. He's so expensive that you could trade him down to someone better and actually take some cash. And then hopefully pick him up later if he wasn't injured or start scoring properly again. So two differences, but one you would trade, one you wouldn't trade.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Cool. How hard is it for you to trust your gut when it comes to picking a player? So let's say Tuke Miller, for example. I hate saying this about Tuke Miller because it's not going to happen, but let's
Don't
say
say
you
anything
started
about
Tuke
the great
Miller.
man. Don't say anything bad about him, Jay. I'll go, I love this man.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Let's say you've picked him. He was set to average 100, so 130, but he's only averaging 100 for the first few rounds. Would you consider trading him off for someone who is scoring better at a same price? Or would you back your gut in to say, no, I'm keeping him. I like him. I picked him for a reason.
Yeah, look, that's a tough one. I suppose you've got to ask yourself, what are the reasons why he's averaging what he's averaging? And if you just think that, for example, he may have a bit of a niggle, a slight ankle problem, for example, you think to yourself, well, that'll probably come good. If it's someone that, I'm looking at someone like a Paddy Cripps, he's got a shot back, for example, you think to yourself, do you know what? They're soldiering through. They just don't look themselves. It doesn't look like they're going to get their body right anytime soon. And, honor to them for getting out in the field and trying to get through a game. But if you can, and this is where the eye test comes in a lot of the time, I think, as well, where you don't just rely on stats. You look at how a player's moving. What positions are they getting to? Are they playing their usual role? Have they been pushed out of a role for a certain reason? There's so many factors I think you need to take into account with something like that. But if you think that the player can turn it around pretty quickly, and this may be a quick fix, then I'd tend to keep the player. But if you've got too many concerns, too many alarm bells ringing, and you haven't got great confidence that they can sort of turn this around anytime soon, then I'll probably just bite the bullet and get out of the pick, I think.
Yeah. I think that was the same for me with Cripps last year. As a good example is that he had a good game or two when you started him, but coming into rounds 3, 4, 5, he just looked really like lethargic. He wasn't performing. And it's like, well, I can sideways trade him for a premium at a similar price or cop the 100K, and then he probably won't be a keeper in my side anymore. So kind of weighing that up is a bit tricky.
Yeah.
So we've touched on getting the right rookies, being round 3. So that's really important, isn't it? That's where you would potentially just go and spend a trade boost. I don't think it's going to happen that much this year because the rookies are so set.
Good point. Yeah.
But previous years, when there was 10 options to pick from instead of 5, and we weren't going, so I think with guns and rookies it happens quite a lot because you're so many rookies on field. But missing out on rookies for that first initial price rise is really tough, right?
Oh, it is. And that's where I really would recommend using a trade boost. If you need to, like, don't just use one just for the sake of it. Like if you've got a rookie with a break even of -50 compared to someone you haven't got that's got a -60, then don't use a trade just for that, because that's going to be a small difference at the end of the day. But on the other hand, if you've got, a -10 break even, someone's coming in -100, for example, then that's when I would probably look to move him, because that instant cash boost that you're going to get from that player is absolutely fantastic. And you probably need that. If you haven't got that and your competition does, then you're getting further and further behind right from the start. So circumstantial, but really, really, really important to make sure I've got all the must-have rookies before the price rises. But again, you raise a good point. How many good rookies or must-have rookies are there going to be? I'm not too sure.
I have a question before we move on to the next part. Would you consider trading Ned Long to a rookie that's on the bubble come round 3? How much money do you have in the bank? Well, just to start with, so how much do you have left over in the bank for sideways or quick upgrade trades?
I've got about 30K.
Okay, so that's pretty flexible.
And that's why I've tried to keep the 30K, because you can do a bit with that. You can take a 102K rookie up to 123 plus. I've also got like Josh Sin at the moment over a Gibcus. It also allows me maybe to go up to a Gibcus if I need to, if Sin doesn't look like he's going to get up. So I think it's a nice, handy little amount to have in the bank, I think, around that 30K. But look, would I trade long? In the example we gave before, if they're an average sort of a rookie, not doing anything overly special, then probably not. But if they were looking to make some quick cash, I think you have to do it. Yeah, I think you have to do it. But it's a bridge I'll have to cross when I get to it. But I suppose a good thing with Long as well is that he's got DPP. There's some flexibility there.
Yeah,
and I think just quickly, we've already talked about loopholes, but if you're ever going for a loophole, get someone that's got DPP. So at least they can cover over different lines and you can actually utilize them during the season.
Yeah, instead of just being an extra captain score, it helps you choose between two different rookies.
That's right. And that's the other reason why I've got Long. Having someone like a Horn Francis / Ward possibly on the bench, maybe you're able to choose one of those scores, I think. And it's interesting that Long has the same, obviously plays for the same team as what Ward does, which may be an option I'll look to loop. So if the other player like Horn Francis has the earlier game, then that works out really well for me, because I'm guaranteed to know who's playing and I can't really stuff things up too much.
Yeah, there's a few really cheap, good looking 102K rookies in the forward line that I've been eyeing off, and it's just like, if Long doesn't play and some of those guys have break evens of 60 plus, DR might want to swap that across.
That's right. That's again a risk of going with a loophole. Another risk of going with a loophole. Either way, it's risky, isn't it, mate? You may not be able to lock in a vice captaincy score, but then again, you're losing cash gen.
So I think this year it is just cash gen is everything. So previous years maybe you wouldn't, but this year there's definitely an option there. So yeah, we've hypothetically we've just finished rounds 1 to 5.
Yep. Cool.
And we haven't spent many trades. Let's say we've gone and spent 2 trades or 3 trades instead of like the 10, that you could have potentially traded with, which has happened to me before. So we don't talk about it. Yeah. So we're just heading into round 6 to 11 now. So just a bit of a story for round 6 to 11. It's when the first DPP changes happen. It's when a lot of your rookies start to make enough money that you might consider trading them off. And similar with your mid-price players that you were just looking to upgrade, they would be getting close. So say like a Berry or someone would be, 3 rounds in or 4 rounds in of price changes. You might like to look to offload him if he's only scoring 60s and that's you average for an 80, that could happen. It's also similar to, we spoke off air about an Oliver or a Steele dropping in price, that this is kind of the time when a lot of those players might be a lot cheaper. So last year, Tom Mitchell, Bont, Steele, those kind of guys were like 100K cheaper in this price time as well. So we've just got a few questions about how you kind of navigate this time period.
Yep, cool.
So first off, do you see any players getting DPP, any significant guys?
Yeah, look, I do. And that's when I was actually planning for my side. And look, there's no guarantees with DPP. So I wouldn't recommend, locking this in your mind that's going to be a guarantee that this player goes there, this player's going to get DPP. But I think it's always handy to take into account when you're doing your future planning. So for me, one player who I think is going to be a moving piece in my side, we did talk a little bit about this bloke off air, maybe getting cold feet, I'm not too sure. But Mitch Mcgovern is one example. So he's obviously available as forward at the moment, but he's going to be playing all of his football down back. He's got a completely new role that we haven't actually seen in the AFL before. We've seen it in the preseason, but not actually during the season proper. So he's, in my book, an absolute lock, an absolute guarantee to get that DPP status. And that then opens up different swings, doesn't it? Because if you've got a DeConning, a McCartan down there, and you're going even a little bit lighter down back, then by around 6-7, when the DPP changes occur, all of a sudden McGovern can now play in my back line. Then I can have Rochelle off the bench, come onto my forward line, take his position, still have the scoring power there. Does Dacos get defensive mid DPP. Can
Looks
he then
like
go
it.
back to the back line? If you've got some like a Ward or a Stevens on the bench, bring them on field. Horn Francis, I think, is another bloke that should be getting forward status. And another thing you did mention when we were having a chat before is it was a little bit surprising that he wasn't available.
Yeah, definitely. To
Now,
start with,
isn't it? Yeah, with DPP. So I think that it's going to make the game really, really interesting. Someone like, I don't know, an Andy Mcrae, if he's been playing out of the back line off half back, we know there's a lot of blokes that can run through that Essendon midfield. There's been talk of Scotty Pendlebury playing down back. Likely that he may be able to get some DPP there. Lockie Weller, does he then get defensive forward status? Is he going to be an option at any stage during the year? One of those real pod type options,
definitely.
I suppose. So, look, I certainly think there are going to be a few players. The bloke that I'm really hoping for is someone like a Rowan Marshall. I'd love for him to be able to be selected in my forward line. And another bloke I think who may have a sneaky chance is Oscar McInerney. So this is what I'm thinking quickly with the Big O, because I don't want to talk about too much about particular players, but at the moment, Darcy Fort's going to be playing, and Darcy Fort will be in our side until Eric Hipwood returns. Now, Eric Hipwood at the moment is recovering ahead of schedule. So we're thinking he'll probably be back before the buys or around the buys. So what I'm thinking is that Oscar's scoring power up until around the buys or up until around when Hipwood comes back is not going to be very good. You know, that's why I wouldn't select him in Supercoach Classic, more of a draft pick possibly.
Yeah.
But I'm when I say I'm pretty certain, I'd be really, really surprised when Hipwood is right to come back into the side that they don't drop Darcy Fort. I'm expecting Fort to go out of the side. That way Danaher can play that backup ruck, and then Big O will be the number one man again. Yeah. And I'm assuming that because Fort is, you know, a pretty serviceable ruckman, that Oscar will get that DPP. I wouldn't jump on him round 6, even if he gets it, because Fort's still on the side. But come round 12, when Fort goes out, Hipwood comes in, and he's got DPP, you could be getting Oscar as a number one ruck in your forward line. So he's someone that I've just done a bit of a sneaky, penciled in for that time on the Supercoach calendar. And that's a bit of a plan of mine to hopefully be able to bring Oscar in if all the planets align, mate.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree with you too. The flexibility of having DPP changes really helps to shore up a few positions on field too. Like I know a lot of people may be running 2 to 3 rookies in the back line. They're poor scoring. You know, you don't want to have guys that may be in and out or they're scoring 20s and 30s. Whereas now, hey, DPP comes around, Nick Dacos can go in the back line. And with some changes in your team, you could potentially trade out those guys that have plateaued in that price. Whereas now, you know, other years you wouldn't have been able to do that. So kind of shoring up a few more positions on field too, maybe with some rookies that you've got that you're going to hold until the buys instead of getting rid of them early.
Yep.
Yeah, because we've found in previous years, like a James Jordan or a Scott, those kind of guys, because they've made so much, but they still score like 80s in the game, that you want to hold them until, you know, as long as you can, basically, right?
That's so true. That's so true. And that's another completely different discussion. How long do you hold on? How much cash do you squeeze out of these rookies? That's going to be another big thing that separates sides this year. You know, teams that go a little bit earlier may get an advantage or maybe a massive disadvantage if then the rookie scores well during the next couple of weeks. So it's what makes this season really interesting, I think, Big J.
Yeah, no, it's really good. So would you consider trading out, let's say you've got Gibcus, he's made as much money. Would you consider trading him out, moving Dacos back, so you've got that flexibility that you can pick up a midfielder? Is that kind of the plan?
Yep, definitely would. Yep, and that hopefully will be the plan. Now, is round 7 too early? It all depends. We're not sure what break evens are going to be, but if the time was right, 100%. I think that would be a really good plan.
Okay. A bit of a chance to plug your channel this way, but how do you normally evaluate players that you are considering getting rid of, and then players you want to bring in? What's some of the things that you consider, considering this is probably like the time when you're really starting to make your first round of upgrades?
Yeah, well, look, there's obviously a lot of things you take and consider. You know, the obvious things like how's a player looking, what role have they got, what's their fixture like, you know, how are they tracking? But the main thing for me is their break even. I think that's what you're alluding to, maybe with this with the stock market videos. Is that it's really, really important to keep a track of how a player's price is looking. So are they looking to go down in value? Are they looking to go up in value? So that's a massive, massive thing for me, is that I make most of my decisions off players break even. So, and that can be the difference, if you go a week early, then you may be paying up a little bit more for them, a little bit less, depending on the circumstances. A lot of this is a bit of gut feel at times. Do I go early or do I not? But this is something that I really do. And it comes back to our point, the eye test, the data, the stats, what do you go for? I think you've always got to look back at break evens. You've really got to look back at break evens. And particularly when you're trading out a rookie, when that break even starts to get towards where their average is sitting, then it's probably time to cull them. I think, see you later. You've done your job. Hopefully they've made 150K. That's what I personally value a trade at, is 150K. I don't like trading a player out for less than that. Sometimes you have to, and there was multiple times last year with like a Ryan Mansell, Murphy from Collingwood, where I had to do it. Yeah, you got to do what you got to do sometimes, but that's probably the way that I feel, mate.
How do you feel about using a couple of trade boosts? So obviously we'll talk about the buys, and the buy rounds is generally where teams will finish, they'll mostly upgrade to full premiums. So this year we have the flexibility of using trade boosts. How do you feel about potentially using a couple of trade boosts in this crucial time of Supercoach to get an advantage, to have an extra premium on field that your opponent might not have? They've got someone who's scoring 80 because they haven't upgraded this week, but you have, you've got a 120 on field instead.
Yeah, I think it's always a good time. I think, look, it's a risk using them too early because we don't know what's going to happen with COVID. I know Janeth was saying the other day that he's saving 3 just for COVID. Okay. So he's not really on planning doing something like that. But I think it's actually a pretty good strategy. But I think the main thing you've got to try to do during the season is keep your upgrade cycle going.
Yeah.
So there's not too many weeks where you want to go 2 down. Sometimes where you have to, if there's 2 rookies that you just can't split, you have to get them both in. We talked about break evens before. So if they've got really, really, really low break evens, you probably have to get both of them in. So a trade boost is going to be really handy in one of these situations because you can still get those 2 rookies that you want as well as your premium and keep that upgrade cycle going. So I think that a really, really good strategy, I think, with the trade boosts is to be able to do that and maybe wait it out until you think there's a couple of rookies that you really need in your side and then use at least one of them then, I think. But I know George was saying early on, when I was having a chat about him with the new rules, was that he was planning on using him bang, bang, bang pretty early to get a really big advantage on the competition because he said, look, at the end of the day, your aim is to finish your side with premiums as quick as you can before everyone else. So there's merit in that as well. But then, those players that take that more conservative approach, COVID does hit, they've got an extra 3-4 up the sleeve, and that's going to be a really big advantage to them. So I don't think there's any right or wrong way to use your trade boosts this year, but certainly during these rounds, I think, it could be a good strategy. I wouldn't go too hard with them, keep a couple in the bank, but I certainly don't think it's a bad thing to do.
I definitely agree with you. Not wanting to double down in a week, try and have that 1-1, and the trade boost gives you the option to actually negate that, still double rookie down, or potentially even go up twice. So we've had times when you've had to pick between 2 players, you've needed to free up cash to do that, and now we can, right?
Yeah, 100%. And that's one thing that I didn't even mention. Then I just focused on rookies. You're exactly right. It could be the other way, couldn't it? There's 2 premiums that are really low. You get Jack Steele's at 560K.
Yeah.
Jake Lloyd's come down to 500. Which one do I go here?
Yeah.
Hopefully use a trade boost and go both. Yeah, good point.
One thing about Supercoach that I've kind of picked up from years of playing is that you can never predict what's going to happen next week. So break evens definitely, but you don't know if one of your players is going to get injured for the season the next week. And if you doubled down the week before, you're sideways trading instead of actually upgrading your team, right?
Exactly. So you're even further behind that way. You're 2 weeks behind them. Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. So between rounds 6 to 9, just talking about your team, would you consider bringing some pods in at this point, players that you've kind of liked their performance, or are you kind of sticking with the higher ownership guys? Like, oh, someone else has got Bont, he's really cheap, I have to get him in because everyone else is getting him in. How do you kind of weigh that up?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of it also depends on where your rank's at as well. So if you're in the top 100, for example, and you're seeing lots of the teams above you
Yep.
that have the same players as what you've got, then I probably would try to look for a pod, because you need to try to make up those points.
Yep.
And you can't do that if you've got the same players. So you probably need to think outside the box a little bit if you're going for overall glory. But at the same time, I don't think that you want to go too far away from the crowd either. I think
Yeah.
it's important to
Nothing too crazy, right?
yeah, don't get too crazy. Don't go too crazy. Look, sure, select a pod that you think has some nice scoring potential, some nice upside to them. But as I mentioned before, don't go for a pod just for the sake of it, unless you're maybe in that situation I said before, where you're really close to being, in there for the winning, for the 50K, and you have to do something a little bit different to set your team apart. I think it's okay to do it then, but usually I wouldn't do it just for the sake of it, mate. No. But look, if you like a pod, you've done your research, you've looked at the numbers, trust your gut, go for him, because that could actually give you the edge as well.
Yeah, I think last year a few people jumped on Parrish, for example, around this time.
And that would have been a great example.
Gangbusters.
Winning. Yeah. Whereas I didn't have the guts to do it last year. I didn't have the guts. So there's an example there that if you do this sometimes, then you can get a really, really big advantage.
Worked out. Yeah, definitely. So just the last question, I guess, around this time, or second last question, but last question. Let's say it's round 10 or 11 and a team has around, so they have around 12 or 13 bye. How do you kind of factor in, would you pick them in your side knowing that they're going to lose a game in a couple of weeks, or would you hold out and try and pick them after their byes?
In an ideal world, I always try and hold out.
Okay.
Because, look, it is hard, isn't it? When you're looking to trade a player in and you think to yourself, well, he's going to be playing for 2 weeks and miss a week. It's really hard. But at the same time, if you want to keep that upgrade cycle going, you've got to upgrade to someone, don't you?
Definitely.
And every team's going to have a bye. So when you are upgrading just before the byes, you pretty much have to trade in a player that's going to miss a week. You pretty much have to, unless you want to be really tight on that and maybe halt your upgrade cycle for a week or two, which I wouldn't recommend doing because you just fall too far behind. So I suppose to answer the question, ideally you'd love to wait until they've played their bye, but sometimes you're forced into picking someone that simply hasn't had their bye yet, particularly before the first bye is played.
Yeah, I think for me, there's two things I would factor in. So we've spoken about break evens, so kind of where their price would be if I didn't pick them up now and they played 2 more games. Would they be too expensive for me to bring in? So that's one thing that I'd kind of pick up, because we're generally picking premiums at their lowest price point. So if Jack Steele's going to jump 30K next week, you have to take him now instead of waiting a couple of weeks, right? Even though he's going to miss in 2 weeks.
Perfect example. And on that exact Jack Steele point that you made, I faded him last year because of that. Because of the buys. He just didn't fit into my buy, and that buy was looking absolutely terrible for me. So that was the reason at the end of the day for me not bringing him in. And guess what? I ended up going and getting a Travis Bokin to the side, and that destroyed me. That destroyed me. I still had a really decent finish, top 200, but there's little decisions like that. If I go back, it would make a really, really big difference. So, all you can do is learn from these type of lessons, I think, mate.
Yeah. I think the second thing that I would consider would be other players that I'm trading out. Do they have the same buy as the player that I'm bringing in? So let's say I want to bring in Tom Mitchell. He's got round 12, hypothetically. I don't know which round he's got, but let's say he's got round 12. I could trade Josh Ward and McDonald for him. So bringing him in wouldn't give me an extra donut on field, because potentially I'm swapping out a player for a rookie who doesn't have that buy round.
It's the same buy structure.
But I'm still missing out on a player in that time. So that's something, I guess, to try and factor in a little bit as well. You're not actually missing out because 2 guys from round 12 are going, and you might be getting around 13 and around 12. So kind of frees that up a little bit, right?
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. That's something to certainly take into account. Love that, mate. Yeah.
So rounds 6 to 11 are done now. So we're up to round
Halfway.
12.
Here we go.
Halfway through the season. How many trades do you think that we should have used, let's say, by end of round 11? So coming into the bye rounds, how many trades would you have? 35 is a bit different, but how many trades would you have liked to use? Let's say the first 5 rounds we used 3 to try and grab a rookie. By round 11, how many trades would you be happy with losing at this point?
Well, pretty much, I think from round 6 to 11, so you've got 4 price range. Yeah, I'd say on average, I'd probably use 2 trades a week.
Okay.
Right up until there to try my best to try to complete my side. I always like to try to have my side completed probably last buy just after the last buy. If you're going, I think 3 weeks after the buy to complete your side, you're probably a little bit behind there. I think, in my view, anyway.
Match with injury, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So if we do the maths, you've got 5 to 11. That's 10, 11, 12. Yeah, I could have used up to 12 trades.
Okay.
I think, yeah.
Cool. All righty. So now we've finished. The Sunday game's finished, and now we're heading to the bye rounds this week. So the bye rounds, I found, I don't know about your experience, but is the times that really separate teams, right? You've got sides who do really well up until the byes, maybe haven't planned, or maybe are missing a couple of players and they drop hugely in ranks. Or similarly, you've got guys who do really well in the bye rounds and jump quite a lot. Is that fair to say?
Oh, definitely it is. Definitely it is. Yeah. And it's always a balancing act, isn't it? The buys, it's a real balancing act. I know. And this is another thing with the buys, when you're looking at your original side, try not to take too many of the rookies into account as well, because probably by the time that the buys have come around, lots of these guys would have been chopped already. So when you're looking at your buy structure, make sure you start off with your premiums. Okay, how many premiums am I missing each round? And then if I look at someone like a Dacos or a Horn Francis, I'm thinking to myself, well, they'll probably still be in my side because they're going to be hopefully one of the last upgrades that I make in my side. So I might take them into account. But that's something that people tend to do at the start, is focus a little bit too much on what rookies are going to be available during the buys. I would recommend against that. Don't take the rookies into account too much. I don't think, mate.
I know definitely with me last year, it was kind of the wrong way to go. I went from about 800, I think it was, let's say top 1,000. And then I had a poor week. I had like 12 or 13 in instead of 18. And then I dropped to like 5K.
It hurts, doesn't it? Yeah.
And then I had to spend the rest of my season trying to claw back. And it's really hard when you've spent a lot of your trades, especially having to make corrections. You just don't have the trades to really get up anymore.
Definitely right. Definitely right. And as we touched on, I think that having the trade boost may help us to maybe get through a tough buy if you've got a tough buy. One thing that really bugs me about the buys is that I don't know if the AFL do this when they're fixturing, but they must look and go, right, who are all the best rucks?
Yeah.
Give them the same buy.
Yep. Pretty much, right?
Every year. I can't remember a year where like Gawn and Grundy have like had a different buy. Marshall's always got the same buy. Then you look, all right, who's next down the list? Yeah, he's got the same. He's got the same. We're stuffed. It's I don't know what they do there, mate. How that actually works with the rucks, but it does my head in every year.
It always happens in Supercoach. Always happens. And that's actually one of our questions here too. So what position do you like to try and see your team in when you head into the bye rounds? So do you like to try and have a lot of cash ready to trade in? Do you like to have your team completed? Or do you like to normally have like plenty of rookies that you can go and upgrade? How do you normally like to see your team at this point?
Yeah, well, I tend to try to have a little bit of a bank going into the buys, I think.
How much?
Like to have a nest egg. Look, it's always circumstantial. But if I can have around the 300K mark.
Okay, in the bank, ready to go for round 12.
In the bank, that's what I like to do. That's what I like to do. And that way, you've got a little bit of freedom to be able to bring in maybe a particular play that you couldn't have if you didn't have that money in the bank. So, look, it's all circumstantial. It's all different. Maybe you would have had to use that money to get a must-have premium the week before. I'm not too sure. But I think it's always a good idea to try to have a bit of cash saved up before you go into the buys. I don't like going in there with no money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I suppose if you've got the extra trades there, then you've got the potential to be able to make that money And even with the trade boost, you might have 4 trades. So you might, particularly in a year like this year, be able to get that money without having it in the bank already. But I think it's always a good idea, if you can, to have a little bit of a nest egg in there.
Yeah. So I've got a bit of a hypothetical for you, and I love hypotheticals today. Let's say you're not planning on using 4 trades this week. It's round 12.
Yep.
There's 2 rookies that next week they'd be on the bubble, but you need to cover outs for round 13. Would you consider bringing them in early and not getting the price increase or the playing this week to shore up your case or your strength for the following week, instead of having to try and bring them in? Let's say you want a triple upgrade next week, but if you don't bring them in the week early, you're stuck trying to bring in the rookies who are going to make money.
Yeah, I actually did this. Who was it? It was a guy from Hawthorn, John Newcomb. I bought him early last year. And was it CCJ even? Or it was someone?
No, it's Reeves, maybe.
Reeves. Reeves
yeah.
is another one that people getting.
Yeah, on a Bramble. It was Bramble.
Bramble.
Newcomb and Bramble, I think, came in. They came in just after the mid-season draft. So they basically started playing straight away.
That's right. So I did go early there. Usually I hate going early on rookies until they're guaranteed to get that price rise. So they're on the bubble and then they're named. I hate going early. But I suppose with the picks, I had a fair bit of confidence in the pick, and I thought that, he looks pretty good. I've heard some good things about him. I think his job security is okay.
Yep.
And he ended up going out of the side for a little bit, so that I wasn't right on the ball there. But yeah, if you need to, you can do it, but you need to be pretty confident on that pick, because other people have been burnt by doing that before, where you think that, they're definitely going to come back and get back into the side, and they haven't after that first week or second week. So if I can avoid bringing players in that aren't on the bubble, I don't like to bring them in. But if you have to, and you've got confidence in that player, then I think it's okay if you're a little bit desperate.
Is it fair to say that the best time to do it would be round 12, because you're not bringing guys in who have already played, like who have already had their bye?
Yes, I would say that, mate. Yeah, I would say that, because at least you think, well, they're not, they haven't got a guaranteed game that they're going to miss.
Yeah, it's not like you're going to be bringing in a rookie and then, they play for a week and then the next week they're off. So
that's exactly right.
Grab them in at that perfect time.
Yep.
The way, looking at your team specifically, outside of COVID outs or things like that, do you see yourself using many trade boosts during the bye rounds, or do you think your team would kind of be done? What would be a factor that you have to use a trade boost for?
I would use a trade boost to try to complete my side.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. And also depends on how many trade boosts I had. I really do want to leave one up my sleeve. I think that's important. I want 1 to 2 after the buys if I can. 2 might be a bit of a stretch, but if I can, I just want to have one in the bank.
Okay.
If possible. So I'm assuming that, I may need to use one if things go a little bit pear-shaped early before the first price rises. So let's just say possibly one there. I'm assuming there might be another week where we've talked about that situation where you might need to do a double down, a double up. I'm expecting at least one for that. So there's 2 that are already gone. So maybe plan for 2, I'd say, maybe during the buys. But it depends how quickly my team's completed as well. But if I was to guess, I'd probably say 2 during the buy rounds. And that way I'd hope to try to complete my side.
I think for me, in a perfect world, it's not going to happen, but in a perfect world, if I had 2 trade boosts by the end of the buy rounds left, then I would be happy. So potentially using a couple for a double upgrade or double downgrade during round 6 to 11, maybe one in there. I haven't really navigated the buy rounds as much, but we might get a carnage year like we had last year, where like 20 players are out and we're scrambling with 3 players, like 12 players on field, right? Including rookies. That's right. Including rookies. And it's just like, you have to use it at that point. So hopefully we don't get a situation like last year where a Richmond games get pushed from round 13 to 14.
Oh,
that hurt a lot of people. But you do the best you can, right?
That's all you can do, isn't it?
Yeah. So hypothetically, you've got too many players out for round 13. Would you consider bringing in a player or bringing in a premium at a similar price and then trading them out the next week just to not have donuts on field?
I've done this before. a
Yep.
couple of times. It's worked once and it didn't work the other time. What I'd recommend is not trying to get too fancy during the buys. I wouldn't get too fancy. What you've got to ask yourself is that trade worth the extra points that you think that's going to come onto your into your side? Now, for me, I found last year I did this. So I traded out. Now, it's not the same player, but let's just say a like for like type player even. So I traded out Andy Brayshaw for Travis Boak. So Boak had already had his buy. Brayshaw was coming up to the buy. And I thought, do you know what? I think that Boak might average around the same mark, but with that extra week that he's got, I'm a little bit desperate on field here. I'm going to bring him in. I think that'll be a good move. What ended up happening was that Boak averaged, I think, about 103 for the rest of the season. Andy B averaged 117, which included a massive 190. So that just didn't work out at all. I value a trade probably too much. Having 100 to 120 points extra on field, I don't think it's probably worth the trade from my experience. If you are not right up there, right up there. If you're talking you're right up there near the lead, then that's a huge amount of points that you probably need to have on field. But if you're just around the pack, just looking for that top 1-2%, then I probably don't think it's worth it.
Yeah. I think for me, I got hit with having donuts last year. So for me, especially, would be a case of, okay, I'm going to try and avoid that as much as I can. So if it means I go from like 16 or 17 players to having 18 in a week, potentially I'd do it. We're talking perfect scenario here where we've managed our trades all the time. So there is some room for sideways trades. So potentially I'd probably do that. Like in your situation, Boak is in there. I'm just looking for cover for that week. I really like Brayshaw. Okay, I'm going to go and trade Boak in, and then the following week trade Boak out. I've seen a lot of, especially with Ruckman, I've seen people do that. So one week they'll bring in Nick Nat for a week that we're missing 2 rucks. So then the following week, if he hasn't dropped enough and hasn't dropped a lot in price, trade Gorn back in. I think a few people did that last year. They ended up with Nick Nat in their sides. Because we got stuck with a Collingwood Richmond buy round.
That's right.
Sorry, Collingwood Melbourne buy round.
I think the other thing that you take into account, just say if the ruckman, whichever player you're bringing in, had a really, really low break even.
Yes,
that may be something to take into account as well, because you think, well, they're projected to go up 40k, 60k over definitely weeks as well. So I'm also making money.
Yep.
And the other great point that you made, which is probably the most important thing to take into account, is how many trades do you have? So if you've got the trades in the bank, go for it. Yeah, you can make that sideways trade. I'd be happy to do that. But if you're still, right on the edge with your trades, team is completed, there's still a few things that you need to do, then I'd be a little bit more conservative. But you raised a good point there. If you got the trades, I think that's okay.
Yeah. And in a perfect world, you're trading Tuke Miller out a week, bringing in Steele, and then having like 2 rookies on the bench who are going to make money that week. And then you can double downgrade or one up with those rookies, and then grab Steele back or grab Tuke back. So you end up with both premiums. So it could work, hypothetically, hopefully, perfect world.
Perfect world. Yep.
Yeah. But that's where planning is so important, right? Being able to actually not be stressed, not be worried about doing a particular thing, just being like, okay, I'm going to plan for this. Supercoach is all about planning, I find.
It is. Planning and preparation, mate. You got to be organized.
So is there any scenarios where you would accept having a week that you have a donut on field, especially now with the extra trades and boosts, or you're always just going to have 18 plus?
That's my aim. That's certainly my aim. And I don't think I can remember. There might have been one year I had 17, I think, but generally I managed to get 18.
18.
Most times. Yeah. Yep. There's always going to be one buy that seems pretty heavy for you. That's just the way it just seems to work all the time. But it's the way that you trade around those buys. As you said before, ideally you wait till they've had their buy and then bring them in. The hardest one to cover sometimes is round 12.
Yeah.
Because you know that whoever you're trading before round 12, they're going to miss a match. But a big strategy I think that people should look to do is after, round 12's concluded, now we look at the round 13 buy teams, look at all those teams from round 12. Which premiums do I like from here? And that's even something I do when I'm looking at my team planning. I'll say to myself, okay, well, I'm not starting with this particular player that has a round 12 buy. I'm going to peg them in as possible upgrade target in round 13 specifically, because I know they've already had their buy. So you've just said it again, organization and planning. That's what it comes down to, I think.
And that's where a couple of years ago, I think St Kilda and Gold Coast started it off playing the China game. Was it St Kilda?
China game.
Yeah.
It was St Kilda and Gold Coast.
So that time, and then just recently it used to be Port and Gold Coast. So
that's right.
You could pick up those players during the bye rounds because they've already played, right? They've already had their week off.
Yes, exactly.
They were the kind of the sneaky ones. I don't think many Port players were really relevant at that point, but like a Wines or a Boak, you could have picked them up at that point and be like, yep, he's going to play every week that week. So, yeah.
Yeah, good strategy that, mate. Good strategy. We're absolutely, we were kissed with that one, weren't we?
I think the only time potentially I would have 16 to 17, especially this year, would be if someone's on suspension. So if they're missing a week or two with suspension, not trading them out because, Jack Mcrae, you're not going to trade him out when he's in your team, or potentially on the other end, if I've got a couple of players who are injured out that week. So we're smashed with injuries or COVID outs. For example, you've got injuries and COVID outs. Trading a couple of primos might mean I have 17 instead of 18 on field because I've had to trade 3 or 4 that week. God forbid that happens. But that's why we've got trade boosts, right? Yeah.
That's right.
So was there anything else to cover with the buy rounds? Anything else that we haven't really spoken about that you're thinking of?
Not really, I don't think, mate. I think we've talked strategy, we've talked trades using the boosts, we've talked about the planning. Look, a lot of this may completely change if there's any COVID carnage.
Definitely.
We can't guarantee that the buys are going to be how they are, but that's how they are at the moment, and that's what we've got to plan around. So I would be planning around them for now, but don't be surprised if this is completely thrown out the window.
Definitely. I think the only thing I would think about, which we touched on a little bit, would be the mid-season draft. So just having an idea of who could be relevant, who's missing midfielders potentially, who's missing a key forward that picks up a mature age in the state leagues that's kicked 60 in 3 games.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's elite stuff. Yeah.
That could be. I know with Bramble and what was his name, Newcomb, and those players, they were really handy guys that scored 70s and 80s. That came in at the perfect time at 102K. Because I think they're all going to be that price unless they're previously listed AFL players, right?
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of keep that in mind, but don't factor that in as, yes, we will get guys, they're going to play. That's it, right?
Yeah. Fantastic point. Yeah.
So previously to the buy rounds, let's say we used 14 trades with our upgrades and that. After the buy rounds, how many trades do we want to have left?
Look,
I would say that maybe we've completed our sides by now.
Okay, so if we've completed our sides,
that's the aim, right? Is to finish our sides by the buy round. So
ideally, my rule's always, when we say a rule, an ideal world is to have 6 trades up your sleeve. I really like to have 6.
11 now because of the extra 5. So we've gone from 30 to 35.
Look, what you're really looking with trades is if you've got a completed side, you're not using trades for upgrades. So basically, you've got to think to yourself, I'm planning for injuries basically now, or unless you can make maybe an extra luxury trade to get someone that's got DPP status at your M line,
bench,
for example, that might be able to cover between 2 lines. That's a bit of a luxury thing. But I suppose, is Lady Luck going to be on your side? How's your injury situation been so far? If you can have at least 6 in the bank to cover for injuries, I think that you should be pretty safe. Then even if you make it to a Supercoach grand final, you can pull a bit of a late move if you need to.
Bit of a shady and bring guys in.
Yeah. Well, I think I had 5. It was 4 or 5 last year after the buy period, I think, or even after I completed my side, and I ran out pretty quick. There was a fair bit of carnage. And look, a lot of that was just bad luck with stuff.
Players get injured, right?
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, if you've got less than 5, oh yeah, you're hoping for a lot of things to go right. Players not to get rested, you know,
But
other
let's
people
say,
may get opportunities. Yourself, it's a team that's not going to make finals, and they know they're not going to make finals. Well, hey, let's give some of these younger blokes a bit of a go before the end of the season. Some of
definitely.
these other rookies that have been maybe underperforming out of the side, even some premiums might go out. It's very hard to tell, but you don't want to leave it too low, mate, and just hope that Lady Luck's with you.
So let's say we try and have we're with 35 trades now. Let's say we try and have 10 trades left and like a trade boost.
That would be fantastic. That would be ideal. I think if you could complete your side with 10 trades, you're in a super position. And then you can even look to get a little bit tricky, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll talk about injuries in the later half of the year just after this. But there was a lot of players who went out with injuries. So
yeah, that's right, mate. Yeah.
So looking back, the bye rounds are finished now. All the carnage is gone. You're not used to seeing big X's on your field when you turn up Supercoach anymore. Hopefully your team's premium by now, and you've got some cash gen, right? That's left over for changes or injuries, that kind of thing.
Yep.
We were talking about, so by round 15, just after the buys, your team should be completed by now. That's fair to say.
That would be ideal, I think, mate. Yep. And any later than that, you're probably a little bit behind, I think.
Okay. How important is it for you to keep some extra trades heading into the later rounds? So I obviously didn't do a lot of movement end of last year because I didn't have trades left over for some sideways swaps for some potential injuries. How important is it for you to have, like you're saying, those extra trades left in the last kind of 5 or 6 rounds?
I think it's super important. I think it's super important if you can. Now, a tough question is, just say if you're one player down from having 22 premiums, so you've got 21 premiums and you've got 2 trades in the bank. There's 3 rounds to go even. Do you use those 2 trades and upgrade to a premium and then have none left for injuries? Or do you just play it safe and say to yourself, well, look, there's probably a higher chance that someone's going to get injured or rested in the next couple of weeks? These are very, very tough decisions. And either way, I think it's a little bit of a gamble. Do you play safe? Do you take a little bit of a risk? There's so many different circumstances that we'll find ourselves with. But look, ideally, I think...
well, let's say running off what happened last year would happen again this year. So having a few players out. I think we had Stewart out at some point. I think Paul was out for a few weeks. I think Zeeble maybe got rested for a week. Those kind of popular players. So let's say that happens again this year. How does that work in with you?
Well, I'd love to have, if that's the case, talking about ideally 10 after the buys. I think that should be safe enough.
Okay.
But normally what I love to have is even one trade going into the grand final.
Yeah.
If you can. But I'd like to have, just say, if there's 4 weeks to go, let's just say, at least a trade a week. I'd like to have. I think that's ideal to cover for one injury a week.
Yeah, definitely. Going off what you're saying as well, I was speaking to Supercoach Mama and she was saying that I think for the last round, she had 1 trade left and she brought in like Jake Stringer because the other people around her point on the ladder didn't have him. So that was a good point of difference there.
Yeah, there you go. And that goes back to that discussion we're having. If you're right up the pointy end when it comes to ranking, sometimes that's a really good move to make.
How let's say you've got a player who we've got 3 or 4 trades of flexibility left. Would you consider searching out a couple of pods who are scoring well with low ownership to try and move up the ladder? Because we're not sharing points anymore. You might score more points than me. Is that something you'd kind of look at?
I think at this stage, that is a time where you probably would look for a pod.
Okay.
I don't think too early on the season, but I think at this stage where we're at now, and you are looking to make some ground.
Jump up the ladder a bit more.
I think that's a good idea to do it at this stage, but not too early.
Have you in the past, and do you actively look for having a decent bench cover player? So we've talked about players getting rested. Do you actively look, and have you had in the past, let's say, a good player as your M8, as your F7, as your D7 that you can swing in, that isn't a rookie, obviously, but you're confident they would score like 90s every week.
I have done that most of the time in the past, and I tried to do the same thing last year, but it didn't work out. And that player was actually a rookie, but I thought he was going really well, was Caleb Poulter from Collingwood. So lots of people traded him out when, his break even got up to around the average and it was the right time to trade him. But I thought to myself, do you know what? No, I'm not going to. I'm actually going to keep on to him because he had that DPP status. I thought he's quite capable of going, around a 75 even, which I think is handy enough. It's not a 90, but, it's around a 70. But unfortunately, he just lost his job. He was out of the side and it just didn't work. And that's why I also used up a couple of my trades as well, because I thought, now this guy's got great job security. He's covering between two lines. Because I've got someone like him, I can spend an extra trade. But I just read the pick wrong. I just didn't have the right read on him, unfortunately, mate. But yeah, in the past, I've had other players around maybe the 450K. I'm trying to think of an example. I think I had Dev Smith one year. That type of player who was a mid forward. And so he's not an elite type player, but he's not going to give you those rookie scores. He's quite capable of going, 80 to 100 type score, for example. So if you can, I think that's an absolute luxury to have. I don't think it's necessarily important to have one on each line, but if you've got one that can cover, or maybe two. So if you've got if you've got a mid forward and a defensive mid, that would be fantastic because you've got all the lines covered basically there, apart from your runs.
I think I've always tried to do it, but it's never worked out because I've always fumbled my trades. And
it's easier said than done, isn't it?
I've got stuck. So I would be the person who had Dev Smith on field, and you were the one that was loopholing his score every week. And that can make a big difference over 6 rounds. That could be 400 points in a certain week. Yeah.
And this is ideal scenario, isn't it?
Of course.
We're talking with Dev Smith. If we're in that, if you ever get to that position where you can have a Dev Smith type playing that role where you don't need him on field, then I think your team's looking pretty good at that stage.
Let's say, talking about Poulter, let's say a similar type player plays for a side that's going to be in the finals this year, or pushing. The last couple of rounds are really important for them to make finals.
Yep.
Would you consider holding them over a guy who plays for a worse side, who's maybe the job security is a little bit more?
Ooh, yeah, it's a tough one because if you're a rookie and or any player and you're playing from the lower sides, you're not making finals.
Yeah, let's say first to second year player type level. Yeah.
That's a tough one because they tend to get pretty tired towards the end of the year as well. So I'd probably get rid of them.
Okay. Yeah. I was thinking the team pushing for finals might be playing him in case someone was injured and then they're coming back and the kid gets dropped, kind of thing.
That's a good point. Good point. Yeah.
So you kind of have to do your research and factor that in a little bit as well, right?
Yeah. Again, that word research, isn't it?
All the time. And that's why people make Supercoach content, It's because people can't do it, but they can watch a video for an hour and then they've got the information. So is there any factors in the second half of the season, so let's say rounds 15 to 23, that you think might be applicable or might happen that wouldn't happen in the first half of the season? So things to look out for, patterns, that kind of thing?
That's interesting. Well, often you'll find, and again, it depends often where the teams are on a ladder, but you may have a team that starts to troll another player in a different position. They might think, look, we're out of the running now. Maybe we'll try this person down back or up forward. It might have been someone like Mitch Mcgovern that was playing forward a lot of the time, and they've thought, look, there's only a few rounds to go, so let's try them somewhere else. So you can jump on players that are looking to have a different change of role, I suppose. That's something to look out for. Scoring patterns, I think, after the bye are always really, really good to look at.
Some players go quite big, right? After the bye rounds, they've had that week off and they go massive.
Yeah, some blokes just need a rest. It seems like just to recharge your batteries mentally, physically, I think, because we know that there's players, and I doubt whether there's going to be too many players that are, apart from maybe the first few rounds of the season, that are playing at 100%.
No, definitely.
Most players have some sort of a niggle. don't they? The other thing I think you can take into account is if you're trading in a player, maybe durability risks tend to decrease because you're thinking to yourself, look, I only need him to play for 3-4 weeks, however many weeks it is. Whereas if you start them at the start of the season, you need them to get through 23 games, ideally. So I think that's another thing that you take into account that you can look for when you're trading in a player is maybe not to worry too much about his durability potentially as well. But look, ladder positions, roles, there's so much stuff, isn't there, to take into account, mate, in the second half of the year.
I think Crisp was one of those players as well. I think he had a good back half of the season when Howe and a couple of those other guys were out, which he didn't have at the start. So you could have jumped on him and done really well in the last 5 or 6 rounds with him versus starting him or picking him up during the bye rounds, right?
That's true. Another thing you can look at, even when you're looking to make your team this year, is, had Chris, who, had a really good end to the season. Other players may have had a really good start and then maybe a poor end to the season. And you got to ask yourself why. What was the reason behind that? Are they red flags going into the next season? Do I scrape them off the list straight away? Yeah, there's a lot that you can do with the data that you get from the last half of the season going into the next year with your planning.
I guess for the last 2 or 3 rounds, try and have a pick or two that you can, if you're in a group league, that kind of thing. We spoke about the grand final, try and match your team against the opponents. If you've got 1 or 2 guys that are different, maybe that's a good thing to have too. That's
right. Yeah. That's a sneaky way of using a trade as well. If you're in a grand final, because there's not a lot of people that do have an extra one left for the grand final by that stage. I think you're pretty lucky. So if you do, you could really use that to your advantage, I think.
All righty. Well, I think we've covered everything. So just wanted to say, DR, thanks for coming on the channel today. Really appreciate it. Loved the chats, picking people's brain that have played Supercoach for a long time and do a lot of extra content type stuff as well. So it's definitely a different way of looking at things that maybe your traditional casual player looks at stuff. So really appreciate you coming on the show. Do you have anything coming up in the next couple of days that you want to plug, or what are you looking at doing throughout the year?
Oh, look, I'll probably need a straitjacket. I think, Big J. Look, content-wise, I did have all these wonderful plans during the preseason, but then you just get busy. And I swear that I thought I had another week up my sleeve. And I had all these plans. But no, look, content-wise, I don't think so. At this stage. I may have a quick thought that comes to mind and pop something out there. But I think the main thing that I'm going to try to do now is just take in all the news that I can, keep on Twitter, look at those club websites for any early news of debutants, because they often like to do that a little bit earlier. So the family finds out, there's a bit of hype about it. People get excited. They do all the presentations and all the rest, get them in for an interview. So that's what I'll be doing. Just keeping my ear to the ground, I think, and just keeping up for all the relevant news and just trying to stay sane, because trying to get to sleep for me in the next couple of days, it's going to be really, really tough. Supercoach has just consumed me lately. It's just consumed my life. So in a way, I'm just looking forward to Wednesday coming along. So at least I've got a couple of picks locked away. Okay, at least I don't have to worry about them now. On to the next guys. But probably just football. I think, Big J. How about yourself, mate? What's your plans?
I've got the team reveal coming out hopefully tonight or tomorrow morning.
Cool.
And then basically just like you're saying, keep up with what's happening, all the announcements and stuff. I know West Coast had a couple of kids getting announced, or a couple of debutants getting announced early. So just keep up with that, handy. Really. Yeah. Cool. Dixon and Brody Howe, I think it is.
Okay.
The guys that played in the preseason game, but they're smashed with injuries. So
aren't they? Just decimated the poor Eagles. Yeah. But mate, I will have to have you on my channel as well. I'll have to have a chat. I had Jonathan the other day. Obviously, Spills and I get together a lot. But no, mate, I've really enjoyed myself. It's been a long time coming, because I know we've talked about this for ages, but the trouble is at times is matching up those times at work for everyone and all the rest. We've got busy lives, doing different things, but I've had an absolute ball chatting with you today, mate, about the Supercoach Calendar for 2022. And yeah, thank you so much for inviting me on, Big J. I know you've got Supercoach Mama on. You've got some great people on so far. So you're obviously doing something really, really well, doing something right. And yeah, look, you deserve a lot more subscribers than what you currently got. But hopefully this season, mate, we'll kick some goals, get you right up there, Big J.
Do you have one piece of advice for people for this year, just before you head off?
One piece of advice is talk to other people, get to know other people. I think, because it's more than just advice and playing the game. It's meeting new people and making new friendships. That has clearly been the best thing for me when it comes to Supercoach. Like some of my close mates now, and I didn't think, I'm a bit of a dinosaur when it comes to tech and IT and all that, but some of my good mates I've actually met online. You know, I'm not talking Tinder here. I'm talking Supercoach here, Big J. Nothing dodgy. Nothing dodgy, mate.
No footy dates.
Rabbit hole. Yeah. But yeah, my advice is to reach out to the community, ask questions, get to know people, because that'll help to improve your knowledge. And yeah, the friendships that I've got are just, I hold very, very dear to myself.
They're pretty good, right? So yeah. And then you've got someone to go and watch the footy with every week. So
exactly right. Exactly right.
All right, dear. Well, yeah, thanks for coming on the channel, and hope you have a great rest of the day.
You too, Big J. Thanks for having me on, and good luck for the rest of the season, buddy.
Oh, thanks, mate. Bye.
Good on you, pal.